My name is Cristina Mora, and I am, along with Eric Schickler, the co-director of the Institute of Governmental Studies. And it is my pleasure to welcome you here today. Great. You all look fantastic. And I'm especially so happy to see the family and the mentors that are here in the crowd to support our one-of-a-kind Berkeley students as they present their research. You know, I've been a faculty member on campus now for about 12 years now. And I've been directing IGS for about 4. And I don't think there's a faculty member here or a staff member here that doesn't truly believe in their heart that Berkeley students are really the future of California and the future of the nation. We truly think that these students, with their diverse backgrounds, their experiences, the questions, the way they push us with their ideas and their desire, their burning desire to learn research and learn new skills is what this nation needs as we move forward to really think about how we're going to build a truly multiracial democracy. I personally think Berkeley students need to be at every single decision-making table out there.
Yeah,
And you're right. And it is sort of one of my greatest honors to teach at the University of California and to be a part of your children's lives. So thank you so much for being here. And thank you so much to our students for really holding up the mantle of Berkeley and really moving the purpose of the great public institution forward. So thank you. In the spring of 2021, IGS and the Matsui Center launched a Diversity and Entrepreneurship initiative with generous funding from the small business growth sector of the Wells Fargo Foundation. The goal of the initiative is to provide UC Berkeley undergrads with research and internship experiences focused on how small businesses, especially those that are POC and women-owned, are faring across California. This past year, the D&E fellows engaged in a team-based research project focused on women of color entrepreneurs and the barriers and opportunities they face in accessing capital and other resources. During the spring and summer, students interviewed over 30 women of color entrepreneurs from across the state and other parts of the nation, gathering their stories of success and challenges, highlighting how lived experience and the impact of women of color's abilities to launch and grow their businesses. And they identified ways to provide additional support to these individuals. The research presentation that you will hear today not only demonstrates the impact that student researchers can have on bringing an equity lens to the study of small businesses, it also demonstrates the power of qualitative research to amplify the voices of the vulnerable and resilient business owners, bringing deeper context and local knowledge to understanding the ways that structural inequalities are impacting California. Today, we have trained and mentored over 42 D&E fellows. Most of them have gone on to careers in state and local government and other forms of public service, bringing with them and to these spaces the stories and findings of their research uncovered and a deeper knowledge about the challenges facing POC entrepreneurs and the state more broadly. Thanks to the generosity of Wells Fargo, we will continue this initiative for a 4th year. Yay! Continuing our focus on diversity and equity in the small business sector. It is now my pleasure to introduce Christopher Galang, who will help kick off our symposium. Christopher is a senior vice president and chief strategist for the Small Business Diverse Consumer Segments team. In his role, he is responsible for leading new product development, assessing policy and procedure enhancements, and developing and managing external partnerships that have a primary focus on increasing equity for women and diverse-owned small businesses to access to capital. A former small business owner himself, he joined Wells Fargo Small Business Group in 2013, where he held several leadership roles, including diverse segments, implementation leader, head of sales, and chief of staff for the small business branch strategy team. He holds an undergrad degree in law and poli-sci from UC Santa Barbara and an MBA from the University of San Francisco. Please join me in welcoming Christopher Hillan.
Hello, my birthday is on Thursday, so I couldn't think about a better birthday present than being here with you all this morning. The session in the other room was just so inspiring, and I learned long ago that when I'm in a room of women, it's better to do less talking and more listening. And so thank you all for sharing your stories. Wells Fargo was just thrilled to be able to support IGS and this research project. As you heard from the work that I do at Wells Fargo, this study is just extremely relevant for the things that I have to talk to and work with at the bank. I mentioned that my role primarily in the bank is to be your advocate. I joke that when I first started this role, my colleagues would hate to see me on their calendar because I'd be the one in there pressuring them to make change. But just like you all are blazing trails in your industries and in your businesses, I hope that I can make somewhat of the impact at Wells Fargo that you all are doing in your communities. So again, I'm going to keep it short and just say thank you again for being here and keep doing what you're doing. And to the fellows, you all have such a bright career in front of you, and I'm just so excited to be here. I haven't been an undergrad in a really long time, and so just being here with you all, it just gives me such inspiration as well. So thank you.
And without further ado, a woman that needs no introduction, who is the beating heart of the Matsui Center, a lifeline for IGS. Please help me welcome Christine Choi.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you, Chris. We are so grateful for your partnership, and we are so excited that you're here today to help us open this research symposium. As Professor Mora mentioned, this symposium features original research by a team of 10 Berkeley undergraduates, our Diversity and Entrepreneurship Fellows, who spent the spring and summer investigating and shining a spotlight on the challenges and the opportunities facing women of color, small business owners, and entrepreneurs. I also want to note that while they were engaged in this research, they were also completing over the summer 8-week public service internships full-time in Sacramento. So they were doing both this research, analyzing or first doing the transcriptions, then analysis, then writing up key findings. They also created this research brief, which we have copies of in the back with their key findings and recommendations, which they will present today. And I encourage everyone here to take a look at it. We also published it in the e-scholarship of the California Digital Library. So it's a digital version is available that we're going to be sharing out soon, as well as this, this hard copy. So today represents the culmination of a lot of hard work. Months, in fact, of the fellows working on this research project, and a chance for them to share their analysis, key findings, and recommendations in a public setting, and especially with many of the women who participated in this research, which we are incredibly grateful to have that opportunity. Researchers don't always have that opportunity to directly go back to the people who shared their time, their expertise, their knowledge, and tell them, this is what we found. Did we get it right? Are there things we may have missed? What else do we need to add to this? And so today, we're incredibly thrilled to welcome more than a dozen women of color entrepreneurs and small business owners who participate in the study. And I would just ask you to please stand up if you're willing, so we can thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your time, your stories, your motivations, your experiences, your insights with our students. We hope we do justice to all that you shared with us today. And if we didn't, please tell us so that we can really get it right. For many of our students, this was the first time that they engaged in an original research project. And that was especially thrilling to be part of leading that team of undergraduates getting their first taste of what original research is like. For many of them, this is the first time drafting a research brief and also giving a public presentation. While some were unfamiliar with diversity and entrepreneurship before launching this research project, others belong to families that own small businesses, and they've experienced firsthand the challenges and opportunities associated with being a small business owner. All of them were motivated by a deep desire to understand the role that intersectionality and lived experiences especially play in shaping the opportunities and challenges that women of color small business owners face, along with documenting the challenges and inequities that they experience so that policymakers and advocates can develop equitable and just responses to them. So we are fortunate to have 6 of our 10 Diversity and Entrepreneurship Fellows with us here today for the research presentation. I'm going to introduce them now and ask you to stand as I call your name. So Vivian Vu, who is majoring in economics, graduating in May. Kristen Keeney, who is majoring in political science, also graduating in May. Matt Iney, who's majoring in political science and business administration, minoring in public policy, graduating in May. Ethan Kim, who is majoring in political science, minor in public policy, graduating in 24. Fatima Martinez Jara, majoring in political science, and graduating in the spring. And Sophia Greenwald, who is a legal studies major and a minor in gender studies and political economy. These are incredible students, and it has been such an honor to work with all of you. 4 more students also contributed to this research, and I want to acknowledge them and recognize their contributions today. Unfortunately, they weren't able to be with us. Many of them have actually graduated and moved on. Some 2 are in Spain. But I want to name them and maybe joining us virtually, I hope so. Christelle Cossio, Fiona Bolger, Molly Jacoby, and Beck Tran. So we want to thank them. One of the goals of the Diversity and Entrepreneurship Fellowship Program is to connect our students and their research with people who work on these issues and who are experts in the field. And we also want to give our students a chance to receive feedback from people who are directly impacted by the things that they are studying. So with this in mind, we've invited 2 distinguished discussants, Xiomara Pena and Marisol Alvarado. And they are going to, I'm going to introduce them in a bit, and they will offer an initial round of feedback, after which we're going to open things up to all of you for more discussion. We're really hoping that there will be a lot of interaction and not just lecturing in this space. So without further ado, I want to invite Vivian up to start the presentation.
Hi, welcome everybody. I'm so glad to see everybody here and thank you for all coming. This is our research brief called Loca and Space by Women Entrepreneurs, and I'm so excited. So to briefly introduce what our research brief is about, we studied over the past 10 months, we found that like 5 things impacted business creation, especially for women of color entrepreneurs. We found that race, ethnicity, gender, and foreign status and location all affected a woman of color entrepreneur's creation of their businesses. And we found before conducting and diving deep into our research that in our data from 2007 to 2018, we saw that 58% growth of all businesses were driven by women. And so we wanted to highlight that this was just women in general, not just specifically women of color entrepreneurs who actually contributed a bulk of this, a bulk of the drive of this growth of business as well. And so, from what we found was that existing research examines these challenges for women, but it doesn't look at the racial and gender identities that we found and including the lived experiences of women of color that influence their success with their businesses. And so that kind of leads into our initiative. We wanted to look at the challenges facing women of color entrepreneur businesses. And so we found that in order to remove the barriers of access, we need to look at access to capital and product innovation and the barriers to that. And those are going to be fundamental driving factors for three things: innovation, creating jobs, and ultimately closing the wealth gap. So that leads into our research questions. How have the lived experiences of women of color entrepreneurs impacted their ability to access capital, financial, human, and social, innovate, and grow their businesses? And what more can be done to support women of color entrepreneurs and close that wealth gap? So that is why we conducted this research. We wanted to study and generate policy recommendations in the governmental, non-governmental, and financial sectors to see and find the factors enabling and constraining women of color entrepreneurs' ability to start and grow their businesses, the role of community support in investing into resource flows for women of color, and the impact of lived experiences, which are heavily influenced by racial and gender identity for these women, and to see how that affects their willingness to innovate and take those risks for the business. And so as a team, we divided up three key themes, which were financial capital, growth and innovation, and access to knowledge resources and methods.
Go ahead and move to the data and methods section. So to better understand the lived experiences of women of color business owners, we adopted a methodology that we felt would reflect our commitment to learning directly from respondents. So participants were recruited from our partner organizations, Small Business Majority and the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center, and through direct outreach. Students were asked if they knew any women of color entrepreneurs in their own communities, in their own backyards, and they came through, leading to a total of 31 business owners from across the country. These respondents were then screened over the phone to confirm that they were in fact women of color business owners and were willing to participate in our study. We also used this time to collect certain demographic details and information about participants to learn more about who was participating in the study, which will be discussed in the following slides. From June through March, our team conducted 31 semi-structured interviews with respondents, using an interview guide to shape our discussions. This included questions about motivations, mentorship, training, funding, expansion, and lived experience. As a group, we then analyzed each interview to identify certain key themes, paying particular attention to anything that we felt was recurrent across multiple interviews. While asking every student to look at over 31 hours of interview transcripts was an enormous task, it also gave us a really unique perspective and an opportunity to see between interviews and identify commonalities. After this process of analysis was completed, we were then left with the key findings that we'll talk about today. But first, let's look at some demographic breakdowns of our data. So we'll go ahead and start with the racial and ethnic identities of participants. As you can see on the x-axis, we have different racial identities, and our y-axis just basically describes the number of participants within each category. So I'll give you all a chance to look at that, and then we can also look to the age breakdown. So as you can see, most participants tended to be over the age of 31, and you can see the breakdown. After that, we'll look at some information about business sectors. As you can see, there's a huge diversity of sectors that are reflected in our research. So retail, construction, food industry, healthcare, consulting, realty, self-help, education, and event planning are all included within our interview participants. And then finally, we can look to stages of business. And what we found was that over half of our participants tended to be in the middle phases of their entrepreneurial journey. With that being said, and with an understanding of how we collected our data, I can then turn it over to our next group, which is our first key finding group.
Thank you. So this is our first finding for access to financial capital. Our first key finding is that nearly all women of color entrepreneurs rely dominantly on personal money and, if available, money from family and friends in order to start their business. And so essentially just bootstrapping and picking their feet up. So I want to highlight one of the experiences of one of the women that we interviewed. And so she states that I have a lot of support in terms of doing my business and staying motivated, but not a lot of support in terms of funding because my support base does not have an into funding. And we found that this was a really prevalent and common theme among a lot of the entrepreneurs that we had spoken to throughout our interviews. And we found that a lot of women felt and faced a lot of issues regarding access to loans because whether it was creditworthiness or the stringent requirements involving collateral and other things, and simply just lack of knowledge, we saw that that was one of the biggest things, which kind of leads into another story that we saw. This specific woman of color entrepreneur, she owns a software company that helps build digital platforms and helps other small businesses also build their own business as well. She had worked a lot with individuals who are also women of color, and she said a lot of the people and her clients that she worked with had a shoebox of like invoices or had a spreadsheet of their customer ledger. They were scrolling through Venmo to their banker, and it was showing like, look, I do have everything. However, many small businesses, especially early stage ones, did not fit the government's quote unquote stupid cookie cutter box. And so to talk about what she was talking about here, she was referring to the federal government's pandemic related paycheck protection program. And a lot of women of color did not actually qualify for this loan. And a lot of businesses suffered during the pandemic. And so she talked about a lot how like there is a lot of issues regarding the forced professionalization of needing proof of business and the complexity of it, the terminology, and it's not accessible, it's not equitable. And so we wanted to work towards finding ways to generate policies that can actually target this specific problem and enforce greater access to capital, especially financially.
All right, moving into our second key finding with regards to financial capital relates to risk aversion towards debt financing for the business. And we were able to break this down into two primary categories. The first being a cultural stigma against borrowing, and the second being the perceived financial risk of borrowing, particularly heightened perceived financial risk. And so to get in a little bit into the cultural stigma, it's important to keep in mind that this could vary by person to person. And so to get into one nuance of this, one example in which this was prevalent involved immigrant status and cultural background associated with that. And the way in which that would end up coming about typically involves having grown up in an environment where that culture which they had grown up in had limited access to funding to begin with when it came to borrowing money for just about anything. And that would then lead into that perceived risk around trying to borrow, in essence, creating a sort of situation where across any situation where there was a cultural stigma, there's a feeling that borrowing could be a sign of failure for the business or a sign that it's going to fail. And I want to highlight this key quote, which you can see at the top left of the slide here, in which an Asian American owner of a consulting business talks about borrowing as a quote unquote do or die situation. And with that kind of frame of mind, it's understandable to not only see the instances in which there are systemic barriers to borrowing that are blocking and denying applications for loans, but at the same time also we have still a gap in the amount of people that are moving forward to try and even pursue loan financing. And to get into that second category when it comes to financial risk, just to break down a few of those categories which you see, self-funding for the business, whether they had the support of others or how much personal money they put into it, that again, the idea of losing that, that is something that added to the stress pressures of borrowing. And one key thing to think about as far as how that differs from the dichotomy of a cultural stigma in this case, it's not so much that the idea that borrowing is a sign of failure. It's just the idea that the stakes for failure are even higher with borrowing, just as any type of financing. And just again, quickly go over a couple of those other factors, which we notice instances of higher perceived risk, family status, such as being a mother to one's family and having children to provide for, on top of running their own business. You know, for some, the perspective of running a business is like having another child on top of that, which is a simple time commitment. Working one job versus multiple jobs, and how that time split can contribute to that stress. And also, of course, cost of living, not just that being a risk factor for the entrepreneur themselves, but in many cases, many of the interviewees express concern for their own employees as well, being able to make ends meet. And that brings us into our third finding, which relates to access to funding thus far. And we found that in many discussions, entrepreneurs were able to find access to funding, particularly in the form of grants, especially around COVID at times. But one key element of this is the fact that the funding that had been acquired was particularly helpful in operations, but a lot of funding in accessibility relates to funding for business expansion. And to get a little bit into this, let's just talk about grants for a second here. I just mentioned that COVID was a time in which a number of entrepreneurs were able to get grants. It's important to put a key asterisk on that, in the sense that many entrepreneurs face barriers to accessing many of the popular programs we knew of during COVID, such as the Paycheck Protection Program, also known as PPP for short. And a lot of those grants which were accessed could vary from state and local grants relating to operating the business, as well as sometimes industry-related grants that were directly tied to providing a certain level of service in exchange for that funding. And then getting into what business expansion looks like. This is something that was particularly exciting because it meant something very personal to each and every entrepreneur, especially depending on what that looked like for their own business and what kind of service they provide. For some, if they operate a brick and mortar operation, such as a confectionery store owner who's talking about her own first location, wanting to open additional locations within the region and eventually out of state as well. And additionally, when it came to the rest of the entrepreneurs, expanding the new products or services for their business was a key goal. And again, just to really briefly highlight, talk about this book for a little bit, in which this African-American owner of a global marketing firm describes the experience of seeing that less than 2% of women get VC funding alone. And on top of that, of course, even a smaller fraction are women of color getting VC funding. Talking about that simple understanding can be inhibiting, let alone, again, the other systemic requirements, which when it comes to just knowing those financiers, knowing and having great experience with, or knowing others that already had a plethora of experience with going through the process of meeting the criteria and eligibility for those other types of funding, not just debt, is something that's really key to consider. And in summary, really just thinking about how the existing funding, such as grants, which entrepreneurs are able to tap into, how that can be expanded to try and help this goal of expanding into new locations, scaling the business to new geographies, new services and products, as well as seeing again how those different sources of funding which are currently inaccessible, how they can be more accessible, that are for other entrepreneurs that aren't women of color being used to scale their business. And that brings us into our next key finding group, growth and innovation.
Matt, I'm in Financial Capital Group. So the next lens that we focused on was the lens of growth and innovation. The idea of equal opportunity for all in this country is a building block for an economy that works for even the most disadvantaged groups in America. To this end, all of us must close the prevailing wealth gap that disproportionately harms marginalized groups. And one way to close this gap is to remove barriers to women of color entrepreneurs' plans to grow their business through innovation and creative business models, their ingenuity. Furthermore, while difficulty accessing capital did present a tremendous barrier Other barriers like the COVID-19 pandemic or the compiling costs of healthcare, of childcare, of housing, these also presented a significant barrier to their plans of growth and innovation. And lastly, in our interviews, we gauged or respondents and we asked them if they had 5 to 10 year plans for their growth and innovation. Some of them did give precise answers, some of them give precise figures as to their projected revenue margins or their profit margins. But others didn't have such plans. They didn't have 5 to 10 year plans. They just were trying to survive for the next fiscal quarter. And we hope that these findings present a necessary light on the barriers to growth and innovation, and as we helped them to materialize their 5 to 10 year plans. Our first key finding is access to capital presents the greatest obstacle to growth and innovation, or lack thereof access to capital. The women of color entrepreneurs that we spoke to expressed deep and unabiding skepticism and wariness about the loan application process due to the assumption that they'll be rejected based on their identity, kind of expanding upon our financial capital. While some of them did take out economic injury disaster loans or international development association loans administered by the World Bank, others cited their status as women of color as the reason behind the reservations for seeking capital through traditional conventions. And we see a quote in which we highlighted an African American woman who's 39 years old in the middle stage of her boutique shop. She said, quote, I already kind of had it in my mind. I probably wouldn't get the funding I needed, even though I was a homeowner. I had good credit. I had savings to match down payment if I was to get a loan. I just always heard about people that look like me, brown and black people trying to get money from businesses. And it's like it's always an uphill battle. So we see that there are entrepreneurs in our group who have the means to do so, but there is that prevailing skepticism, that prevailing perception that they would be rejected simply because of their identity. And to continue, there are also perceptions about financial literacy or the lack thereof, which are tied to prevailing stereotypes of respondents' race and gender that may also impact a woman of color's ability to secure loans. One respondent who owns a consulting business and works with other women entrepreneurs, who's an Asian American in an early stage, again, of this consulting firm, she said, quote, I can also share because I work with women entrepreneurs that a lot of them have been turned down for loans. And one of the reasons is because there's not enough financial literacy. Banks do not trust women to understand finances. And this is an unfortunate trend that we've been seeing for a lot of women of color who are just trying to, again, expand upon their 5 to 10 year plan, trying to materialize their ability to innovate, to materialize their plans to create more ingenious projects, and yet they just don't have capacity to do so. Another Asian American who's 48 years old in the late stage of her engineering consulting firm, she said, quote, so building a capital has been a challenge, and it took us almost 10 years to get a line of credit. And again, this is a huge barrier to plans to grow and innovate. And Fatima could talk more about our key findings too.
So our second key finding is that the pandemic had a death and impact on two women of color businesses, and some grew while others barely survived. The pandemic, of course, affected the economy, whether it was personally or business related. Those that thrived demonstrated innovative strategies such as transitioning to online spaces that were previously either not accustomed to or did not have a strong presence in. While those that barely survived took on initiatives to find ways to manage, whether it was to close down for a temporary time or to work other jobs on the side. Despite the state of anxiety the world was going through and the uncertainty of the future, they persevered. And insight into such perseverance is hinted with this boutique owning respondent who got one of the best sales of the year during the pandemic. As she explains that we were never the ones that were getting all the funding anyway, right? So it's kind of like now during the pandemic, we have an even playing field. And you just kind of see the businesses, and they were never having this struggle before. And that's true, because before the pandemic, women of color entrepreneurs face financial barriers because of their intersectional identities. And as such, with their counterparts finding the struggle of access to capital during the pandemic, the issues of the system was further reflected. These were the same struggles women of color entrepreneurs have been facing for a really long time, giving them a silver lining and knowing how to persevere with limited resources, and whether that was using innovative strategies that allow them to thrive or more conservative strategies to survive. And as such, that was the key finding of this. Thank you, sorry about that. Our third key finding highlights that other barriers related to women of color lived experiences make growth and innovation more scalable. Women of color's lives lived experiences as parents and caregivers, combined with high cost of healthcare, housing, childcare, and food, along with limited financial resources, are also presented barriers that their plans for growth and innovation. For example, this 7-year-old really from business owner said, like I said, I'm doing this since my daughter was young. And I was like, oh, if my daughter was sick and I was invited to an event, I couldn't go, I could not participate, and it could have been a great opportunity. Reflecting that the lack of childcare support limited her ability to participate in networking events. And it probably wasn't the first time, and it probably would have been more than once or twice. Yet being a mother or a caregiver is not the limiting factor. Rather, it is the high cost of childcare, because their lack of access to capital limits their spending abilities overall. When a woman has to decide between attending network events or saving money on childcare, their focus is on survival. The second example I have that really comes up is they don't have childcare, they don't have medical care, women don't have the capacity to pursue their businesses. And again, it is because of the high cost. Because they do not have the financial resources to increase their capabilities to grow and innovate their businesses. And that should be such an important aspect of the focus. And now I wanted to turn into our third set of key findings with access to knowledge bases and networks.
Hi, everyone. So in order to make sense of women of color entrepreneurs' experiences as business owners, it's critical to consider the knowledge and networks that they came in with. And so we think that's our first key finding, which is that many women of color entrepreneurs face difficulties accessing comprehensive networks and knowledge bases when they first embarked on their entrepreneurial journeys. And while every individual interviewed had varying levels of exposure to the business networks and entrepreneurial strategies key to facilitating success as an emerging enterprise, all shared stories displaying creative problem solving and perseverance. So some respondents benefited from significant personal connections to entrepreneurship, which provided different degrees of benefit. A handful reported these relationships as being essential to their awareness of critical workshops and different resources that really facilitated their journeys as business owners, and others simply reported gaining a source of inspiration or advice. So as you can see the quote in the top, they had hair businesses. The biggest thing I got to see was the work ethic. It wasn't about money because my parents didn't have a lot of money. So the simple fact of having a parent who's an entrepreneur, whether or not they were able to pass down that intergenerational knowledge, it served as a source of inspiration in allowing themselves to be seen. And with that, they were able to enter their journeys on. Additionally, some respondents with previous corporate or industry experience described having greater ease in their transition to entrepreneurship as a result of the applicable knowledge and skill set gained in areas such as business operations, bookkeeping, and human resources, as well as existing networks in the industry. So that can be highlighted by the middle. I went into business operations, HR. I did everything from budgeting, program development, management, HR, accounting, bookkeeping, fundraising, and I learned a lot. So, having those experiences in corporate or industry was really helpful because it allowed for the development of these skills that were then applicable to their businesses. And then previous exposure to business concepts and strategies through higher education was also highlighted as beneficial. And higher education more generally was also mentioned as being useful by some entrepreneurs, whereas other entrepreneurs didn't find it as helpful in their entrepreneurial journeys. So we have a quick bottom. I got my master's in business. I was able to have the foundational leadership pieces to see what I would like to do as a business owner. However, the majority of women interviewed reported that they did not have any significant entrepreneurial connections, which left them to navigate the legal, financial, and social complexities of entrepreneurship independently. They faced greater obstacles finding mentorship, as well as accessing advantageous resources, and they also had a lack of insider knowledge, which resulted in amplified mistakes and less guidance during the self-learning process. Some interviewees also attributed adversity to a broader lack of awareness of available resources and necessary entrepreneurial knowledge, such as financial literacy within their communities. I want to highlight these two quotes. I didn't mention this one earlier, but being rookies and not having access to mentors when it comes to business, we made every rookie mistake in the book. And then second quote, which says, a lot of things I had to find for myself because it's not really displayed or advertised in my community. There's a lot of Black people that want to start their own businesses, but they don't know how to start or where to go. So this is really important to consider. Yeah. So overall, respondents without exposure to business or education or prior experience expressed hardship entering the entrepreneurial sphere, which suggests more broadly that the exclusion of women of color from higher education and the private sector impacts their opportunities in entrepreneurial success. I want to highlight the bottom, which says the mechanics of starting a business. I kind of did all of that on my own. I was self-taught. I just did a lot of research. I didn't have anyone close to me that I could ask those questions to. Okay. Okay. So with this understanding of most respondents' initial challenges accessing vital networks and knowledge bases when starting their entrepreneurial journeys, the next step is to evaluate the efficacy of existing entrepreneurial programs and other resources which are created to fill these gaps. Which leads us to our second key finding, which is that women of color building their knowledge networks from the ground up encountered obstacles when seeking out the right resources to facilitate their growth. Yet those able to access proper training programs and organizations benefited greatly from their support. So our first area of focus was how entrepreneurs found organizations providing them support. And many respondents were able to access development programs and resources which fit their unique entrepreneurial needs and were invaluable to their growth. So what we can learn from that is that they are very often found through networks. So intergenerational entrepreneurship, developed business networks, and mentorship were all extremely helpful in finding the right resources, as well as the fact that many women created their own identity-based knowledge networks to support their counterparts through shared challenges. And when this wasn't possible, entrepreneurs relied on personal research, which came with its own challenges in terms of filtering which resources would meet their personal needs. A smaller minority of respondents often found them via outreach from organizations themselves or through involvement in small business support programs. Also some quotes that we can read here. I will skip through for the sake of time, but a lot of trainings covering the broad scopes of skills necessary were very helpful for entrepreneurs. Oh. Yeah, perfect. So trainings covering the broad scopes of skills necessary to manage a business were very helpful for entrepreneurs, which is likely related to the difficulty that many respondents without a background in entrepreneurship expressed in understanding what it was they needed to learn in the first place. So some examples of impactful trainings included how to successfully present to investors, online marketing, and financial literacy. And then, despite the existence of these trainings and resources, many respondents indicated that they found them much later in their entrepreneurial journeys, while others just simply expressed that they needed more resources in these topics. And a significant portion of respondents indicated that this is due to a lack of outreach and awareness within their broader communities, which we touched on earlier. One respondent shared, I want to share so that other people don't have the same hurdles. There are a lot of resources out there, but they're not really advertised to my community. In addition to that, costs of certifications, courses, and resources served as a barrier to women seeking to expand their knowledge bases. For a lot of the free programs that did exist, there would be time-consuming application processes, as well as denial of applicants due to high demand for these free programs. And then more generally, a lack of representation in entrepreneurial spaces hindered the development of a network, even when they were in spaces created to foster networks. So another quote that I want to highlight, I've also reached out to an organization supporting small businesses with investing and advising, and even with them, we were denied without really getting a chance to meet anybody. So this goes to show just some of the barriers. And then also some of the knowledge that the women of color entrepreneurs needed most support developing that they expressed during their interviews were assistance navigating permitting and legal processes, employee hiring management, and requirements for loans and grants, as well as, in more industry specific programs. A few expressed that the programs they participated in were missing information and had to be supplemented by self-teaching or paid programs. So some quotes to highlight: you can throw a rock and hit a program for minority women-owned businesses or women-owned businesses or local small businesses or something. So the programs are created, the theories are in place, but the reality of it, even if you go through the program, even if you get certified, there's stuff missing. Another individual said you need some coaching of how to tell your financial story. So that can be an area of opportunity to help people understand what components they need to tell their story so that they're fundable. So all of these findings suggest that despite the existence of programs, there's not enough space or sufficient outreach to meet the needs of all women of color entrepreneurs. And this is something that we should focus on in the future.
Right. So what we found was that despite barriers to networking on account of women of color entrepreneurs, race, and gender, respondents described having a vested interest in not only receiving, but also providing mentorship. As one African American owner of a self-help company expressed, quote, "You need to be able to see it, to know that it's possible, and then you need a person who can show you the ways." Throughout the analysis process, we consistently found that women of color entrepreneurs face barriers to accessing mentorship, as networking events are oftentimes dominated by white males. One African American business owner in the education field described this effect saying, quote, "I've been invisible. I walked into a room and it's predominantly men, and I'm trying to have a conversation, but they don't share anything." However, another trend that we found in these interviews, and a particularly exciting one, was a commitment to bridging this gap. Respondents were deeply invested in facilitating the growth of other women of color entrepreneurs as they navigated their individual business journeys, often taking time out of their busy days to show their peers the ropes. This often arose out of a desire to be the helping hand that they wished they had had in their own business journey, and is reflective of the transformative power of mentorship when it comes to entering the world of entrepreneurship. From Latina business chambers to Black women's entrepreneurship groups, women of color business owners were creative, resourceful, and insistent upon creating spaces where they did not exist previously.
And then in our last part before the conclusion, we have our recommendations. So our recommendations are derived from our key findings. We employed a multi-pronged approach to our recommendations, and we divided upon three axes: financial, governmental, and non-governmental. And we hope these recommendations usher in a new environment that not just welcomes entrepreneurship, but it serves as a catalyst for, again, the plans to grow and innovate. And we hope that such barriers that we've identified in this presentation become a relic in the past, that we do have a future of an even playing field for all, regardless of our background. Okay, so our first category is financial, and our first recommendation within the financial category is reforming lending criteria and lending institutions and establish loan guarantee programs. Banks and other lending institutions should develop lending criteria that address historic disadvantages as well as nuances advantages. A really good example of this is how the COVID-19 pandemic impacted credit scores for women of color entrepreneurs. And we hope that banks inculcate this new information and when they are basically administering loans. Additionally, policymakers should establish what's called a loan guarantee program, specifically designed to support women and entrepreneurs. They're providing an added layer of security for lenders while reducing barriers to obtaining loans. Our second recommendation deals with reevaluating collateral requirements. Traditional lending practices often prioritize what is called tangible collateral assets, such as property or equipment or housing, which can be challenging for women and entrepreneurs who may have limited access to such assets. Policymakers should encourage financial institutions to consider alternative forms of collateral. And really good examples of these are intellectual property, personal guarantees, or just the potential of the business itself. Hopefully, this change, this shift can help level the playing field and increase access to the financial financing needed to invest in their growth and success. And our second category deals with governmental recommendations. And our first recommendation within that category, our second category is non-governmental recommendations, and our first recommendation within non-governmental is enhanced access to education and training for women of color small business owners. Policymakers should explore ways to enhance access to education and training for women of color small business owners, particularly when it comes to skills that are crucial to accessing capital. And we discussed this before in one of our key findings. These skills can be a variety of things: bookkeeping, accounting, financial forecasting, crafting business plans, creating management structures, or just simply presenting to investors. These skills should be promoted within our education program. Moreover, financial institutions and other entities should provide some more accessible information and guidance on the different forms of financial assistance available and how to successfully apply to them. Our second recommendation on our non-governmental category is establish greater opportunities for effective networking and mentorship. Networking and mentorship are very vital assets for growing or starting a business. Finding people that you know and exchange of ideas, of skills are very essential for creating innovating products or launching products. They're really something that we should prioritize. So to that end, we are recommending something called an entrepreneurship education program, which should be expanded and tailored to the specific needs of women of color, as well as to different industries and stages of businesses. To meet the needs of the women of color small business owners, especially those without previous exposure to entrepreneurship, who are just getting their feet wet, who are the first generation in their family to even embark on the bravery of entrepreneurship, there must be resources that cover the basics of entrepreneurship. There is an additional need for resources to navigating the complex legal permitting process, the employment hiring management, technology, and the marketing consumer understanding. These resources should be available in multiple languages as well to increase accessibility, and different formats, again, to increase accessibility. And greater outreach must be done in communities traditionally underrepresented in entrepreneurship. Our last recommendation, non-governmental category, is provide support to women of color entrepreneurs as they navigate complicated financial and legal issues. The codes, the permits, all the licensing needed are incredibly complex in starting a business. Any person who has tried entrepreneurship knows this. And our recommendation deals with trying to incentivize pro bono consultation for legal firms or financial assistance firms so they can help women entrepreneurs start their endeavor so they can weed through the complexities of such codes, and so they're not bogged down, and so they can spend more time prioritizing the ingenuity of the product and launching the product, as opposed to navigating, again, the complexities of financial and legal issues. So we should recommend, again, pro bono consultation in that field. And then Fatima can discuss governmental recommendations.
Right, our last category. The first one within this subcategory is the streamlined informational resources for the use of the employees database. Which sounds really fancy. It's just to say that it's a database that that would have resources such as grants, loans, industry-specific trainings, networking events for business owners. And the intention for this was to ensure that there is an accessible place where all of these information can be provided, especially for communities that are historically underserved, to know what is available to them. And it also ensures that the government takes one step closer to connecting with those communities. and pushing forward. The second recommendation within this category is to expand the supplier diversity program. Now, the supplier diversity program, its efforts is to include suppliers in supply chain and sourcing processes that are owned by a minority, by a small business. And the California supplier diversity program is already established, right, with small businesses. However, we recommend and we seek to increase that the contracting includes more women of color entrepreneurs as suppliers, right? We want women of color to be a part of that because they make a big portion of it and they're not included. Now, our last recommendation within this category is to conduct an economic review on how women of color entrepreneurs adapted their business models from 7 in business outfit. As one of my key findings really went into that process, a lot of strategies were used, whether it was knowing how to use word of mouth, whether it was marketing tools to ensure that online campaigns were still provided to the rest of the community. These are fundamental and strategies that are very innovative and very that many can learn from. Not even just in the color entrepreneurs, but all of them. The strategies that were used make an impact in things there is cause of another issue that cause an impact doesn't. And before we conclude the recommendations, I wanted to take a moment to really say that these recommendations did not come just out of us. This was solely because the respondents gave us all of these findings. And this is what came out of it, but I know there's probably more that you have to put out for them. And as such, I will leave you for the conclusion.
Okay, so to conclude, as we've seen, current research yields a lot of insights into minority businesses or women businesses, but we fail to consider the critical role played by the intersection of race, gender, and other factors in entrepreneurship. So illuminating the lived experiences and intersectionality of the women of color interviewed showed barriers to financial capital, growth and innovation, and access to networks and resources. And dismantling these barriers and giving voices to these women and the struggles that they face, we hope will usher in a flood of new opportunities for women of color entrepreneurs, which have been long held back by a system which has perpetuated the existing wealth gap. We're hoping that greater access to capital and innovation can serve as a catalyst for transformative social, political, and economic change, and equity for women of color entrepreneurs and communities that their businesses serve. We are so grateful to all of our respondents here today. And yeah, thank you guys so much for listening.
Thank you, Sophia. Thank you, fellows. So now I'd like to introduce and invite forward our first discussant, Xiomara Pena. She is the Vice President of Programs and Engagement for Small Business Majority. There you are. And that's a national small business advocacy organization that's based in Washington, but has offices around the country, including 3 here in California. She works with her team to plan, develop, and drive initiatives that build a more inclusive and equitable economy that directly benefits entrepreneurs in underserved communities. You can read much more about her in our program. Xiomara, please come forward.
Wow, give yourselves another round of applause. That was so many great findings there. And I also just want to share, Christopher, thank you, and the Wells Fargo Foundation to continue supporting research like this. It's incredibly critical, especially as we continue to think about the solutions that are needed to really uplift communities to strengthen our economy. You know, I have to say, while y'all did an amazing job interviewing business owners, the report itself, as terrible as it sounds, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that, you know, there are so many still opportunities to continue to support women-owned small businesses. there are a lot of needs, and having the opportunity to directly meet with business owners does definitely provide such an avenue to really unravel and look at how you can build solutions, because we don't have all of the right tools and solutions, but oftentimes the communities that we are serving are able to tell us what exactly they need. I referenced this right before we stepped into the room, but one of the things I really appreciate that y'all broke out the recommendations for government, non-governmental partners, and then just thinking about, again, the greater solutions that are needed. One of those access to capital avenues, we've seen it with the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, where our own government carved out a 21-day window for BIPOC small business owners to apply, and that was challenged in the courts. And it was a white business owner who brought forward a lawsuit against the SBA, Small Business Administration, and the program was as intended, that 21-day window, to help, folks that maybe were going to be delayed in the process or who have already probably been on the back of the line to other federal relief programs. This was an opportunity to try to help level the playing field there. We saw that challenge in the courts, and we did see them, the SBA ultimately did have to process applications as they came in, rather than that 21-day window that they had reserved. And more recently, we're starting to see, so that was an SBA developed government entity trying to build solutions that have avenues for diversity built in. And now in the private sector, we're seeing Fearless Fund, it's not a government run venture capital firm, but they are, being also sued for and challenged in the courts for the grants that are specifically carved out for supporting Black women. And so it is unfortunate that, I think the pressure and research like this does help continue to make the case as to why it is important that we have programs that are dedicated to reaching women business owners, immigrant business owners, folks in rural communities. We know that when we help one woman-owned small business, we're not just putting money in her pocket, but we're putting money back into the community. I think someone referenced this too, but spending $1 at a local small business, 70 cents of that dollar is going to be recirculated in a local economy compared to about 30 cents at a corporation. And so when we shop with our wallets, it does also help our communities. And you saw that, I think, reference in the report that y'all put together as well, in terms of the importance of networks. I think one of the I really appreciated the inclusion of and this intersectionality of the lived experience, because again, data is important, and you look at so many charts, and sometimes I look at the SBA graphs and I'm like, oh, my head hurts. I need Tylenol after this. Because data is critical to helping informing our solutions at scale, but the qualitative data also provides that the human aspect of building human-centered solutions, right? And so having that opportunity to hear directly from the business owners of how their social networks, it's not just capital as it relates to money, but it's being able to have an uncle who's a lawyer that you can turn to and say, hey, uncle, I'm going to start a business. Can you help me review this tenant agreement, this lease agreement, to see if it's abusive? You may not have uncles like that in your network, depending on the very real reality of the body that you walk into. And so it is very critical. Fascinating research. You guys did a phenomenal job outlining all of the findings, and I'm really excited to just share some of those solutions with friends and colleagues as we continue to do our work to advance the needs of small business owners.
Thank you, Xiomara. Xiomara has been an incredible partner and a key source of guidance from the very beginning when we launched this initiative over 3 years ago. So we're just immensely grateful that you're here today again and continue to support this work. And now I'd like to invite forward our second discussant, who is one of our study participants, Marisol Alvarado. You can read about her in the program, but I'd like to say a few things about her. She's a first-generation college graduate, proud East Palo Alton. She immigrated from Michoacan, Mexico at age 10 and was raised by a single mother, the eldest daughter with 2 siblings. After acquiring over 15 years of management experience in the nonprofit sector, first as a program director for Catholic Charities in East Palo Alto, and then working with the East Palo Alto youth and family community, she transitioned to the private sector, joining her husband and as president of Alro Window Coverings, a full-service window treatment contractor servicing both commercial and residential clients in the Bay Area since 2008. She also serves as a business advisor for San Mateo County Small Business Development Center, proudly supporting Spanish-speaking entrepreneurs and business owners, and was recently nominated for Entrepreneur of the Year by InStyle Latino magazine. You can read more about her in the program. Please join me in welcoming Marta.
Thank you. Thank you for that warm welcome, and thank you to the fellows for taking the time and highlighting what it is to be a woman of color in business in this nation. It is ever challenging. I think the research highlighted beautifully the challenges that we face in the day-to-day that we normally, we unfortunately learn to normalize as women of color. Well, that's what we expected, and it's not a surprise here. So to actually put it out on the screen and say, no, it's not normal, and this is something that needs to be changed. And the importance of having someone, you don't have an attorney on hold, you don't have someone in business that is doing business with a strong structure to call upon and say, I have a question, and can you give me feedback on how I can best go about this challenge that I'm facing in my business? It's ever so lonely. What I learned in the pandemic is that there are resources. The internet is a beautiful thing. Getting out there and saying, this help is for me, this help is speaking to me, it's something that comes with confidence and years of saying, yes, you deserve it. Otherwise, you simply look at information, you look at resources, and you scroll to the left, you scroll down because it doesn't talk to you. So me having the opportunity to participate, having the opportunity to be here today, it meant a lot in terms of highlighting my identity and owning 100% of that and saying, this is my story. I'm a kid that came to the United States undocumented. I was a young girl with someone taking me on a after school in East Palo Alto saying, what are you doing this summer? And me barely speaking the language, saying nothing. And them taking an opportunity to say, well, you're going to a summer program. It's a college bridge program where you will be highlighted to college. College, what is that? It just didn't speak to me because my mother, my family, myself, we were struggling to assimilate a new culture, and it just there was no one that in my family was college educated. So someone gave me that opportunity. Now being in business myself, someone spoke to me about what it is to run a business, what it is to own, and what it is to speak, and what it is to just carry yourself with a lot of pride and say, yes, I have something to say. I wanted to give that back to other communities and other women in business and other people of color now starting their business to say, well, this is what I know. This is how I learned it. How can I share this knowledge with you, and how can I help? And what are the challenges that you're facing? Then maybe I can scroll up or down or left or right and ask those questions for you and give you back the information. Very proud of that. I now support over 15 clients that are Spanish-speaking clients that are learning about what it is to have an accounting system. But they're learning what it is to have a relationship with your banker. I've been very lucky, very, very lucky to have someone at Wells Fargo, to give me a lot of opportunities to get access to loans and wealth. And for her to come and coach me and say, no, Marisol, the time to ask for financial help is not when you're struggling. It's when your business is in green. That's when you ask for the line of credit. But I don't need it, but you may need it. You don't know. So go ahead and apply. And let me send you the application. And if I have any questions, I'll email you by the end of the week. If I haven't heard from you, I will email you tomorrow. So that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Gita at Wells Fargo, local here in San Francisco, Indian descent, and I love it. So of course, women of color supporting me, women of color. What else can you expect? So thank you. Thank you. I would love to talk to every one of you. Love to connect. Ladies, it's such an honor. And again, thank you fellows for the opportunity.
I can invite forward the fellows and also Marisol, stay up here. Diamara, stay up here. And we're really hoping for an interactive component of this event. We would love to hear, especially from the other women who are part of this study, reflections, responses, comments that you would like to share. We have a mic. Luca has a mic. So please, fellows, come forward. These chairs are for you and also for our discussants. And we're just hoping to spend the next at least 10 minutes in conversation with getting additional feedback from all of you. So, yes, I guess I'll go. Okay, we've got a mic for you.
Hi, how are you? Marianela Mendoza, owner of M3 Consulting. I was one of the other participants in the study. What up, Molly? She's not here. I spent a lot of quite a bit of time with her, and she was very lovely. So if you're anywhere near as lovely as she is, I'm so excited about this next round of Cal graduates because all my friends went to Cal. So I'm very excited. One of the things that I did not hear, and I would like to know why I didn't hear the word racism as part of the intersectionality of what we face being business owners. Because it's almost like the onus of not knowing what we didn't know is on us, and opposed to government policies that will allow us to participate easily. And congratulations again, Emma.
Thank you. Would any of our fellows like to respond? Sophia?
Oh, good.
Don't mind, he's got a mic right there.
Oh,
so.
okay. I think I definitely agree with everything that you pointed out. I think that's what at least I was trying to convey in the section about social capital and the difficulty that women of color had accessing networks and spaces where they were traditionally unrepresented. So a lot of what we heard obviously was them walking into rooms where they weren't represented and not being able to connect on the same level with the white men, the male, bankers and all. I feel like, yeah, so we try to convey that. I'm sorry that you didn't see it. That's definitely something that stood out to me and was one of the most impactful parts of the research, was seeing the way that racism and sexism and all these ideas of what a person of color knows and what a woman knows and where their place is in business, in the business world. Seeing that reflected concretely just by nature of like the actions of bankers or, the inability to connect with people at networking events and things like that, the consequences of that can have material.
I would just want to share that we have seen so much research develop that does break down like how structural racism has impacted communities. And it's sometimes hard to make that connection as you would think about like the connection of small business. But it's not that hard when you think about like the fact that most people leverage like, let's say, their personal assets to be able to start a business, and you go back to like the practice of redlining and how harmful that structural practice was, sanctioned by our government and also in partnership with financial institutions, in which now they are trying to, they've made some commitments to walk back, including the support that they now have to offer back into reinvesting in their communities through CRA. So like the home, there's a connection to, again, if you are a family back then was unable to own a home, today that's probably still impacting you, right? In your ability to leverage your personal assets to then dig into your pockets and then start and launch a business. So it's a good point. Definitely maybe there's an opportunity to dig a little bit deeper next time and ask some questions around how do you explore that and suss it out.
I'd like to say something, please. So I appreciate you saying the word racism. There isn't another word for racism. So, that, you know, oops, I usually use a microphone. But I actually come from Sonoma County where, Latino businesses are very common. About 54, probably 60% of all small businesses right now are Latino based. So on the stem of racism, as a brown person, where in Sonoma County, they're like, "Oh, you're brown, stand in this line." And then, "Oh, someone else brown is going to help you." And then you start in this little cookie cutter little thing where somebody goes quoted and they leave so much out. Being an entrepreneur is a contact sport, that I'm okay with. There's a process to that, but for you to slow me down and then not actually give me pertinent advice, because it matters not if you're Latino, Africano, Indio, it doesn't matter to me where I get the help I need. Does that make sense? I mean, I grew up in an all-white community in Seattle and I got helped a lot. So that's not it. It means how you treat people and that you do not patronize them and that you respect that, yeah, we're all at little different stages, but you don't get to be racist in your loving approach to me because, I'm Latina. And so I just, that was just my one thing. Something missing from the data of the 31 participants, I think, was, are we college educated? This is the first time I've been on a college campus since I was in college in 1983. So, and I didn't finish college. So I'm very grateful and honored to be here, but I would be curious to know how many of us actually had a college degree. Because you don't need one to be a small business.
Yeah, sure. Most of the y'all don't have.
Hi again, my name is Michelle Johnson. Thank you, all the fellows that's here. And also thank you for what I have to say is, when you talk about and the emergence about as well. And when the event was posted that we have that at the same time, news broke out about the AA in regards to small businesses have to run an essay to prove social injustice, right? And it's kind of like, wait a minute, this is another setback, not to add this another layer, but it reminds me of like red. It's like, are you serious? We have to write an essay to prove social injustice as small disadvantaged businesses. Who wrote this? But I also want to add in the research that was conducted, a lot of the participants talked about getting assistance or with loans and funding and people not trusting women to manage money. And I love what you said, Marcel, about having someone who will hold you by the hand and talk to you and give you these tidbits. But for me, this is my own personal experience. I've been in business for about 9 years. I'm college educated, finance, doing all the right things. You think, oh, we go to the bank and, get a loan. And what I did not like, and I still see this, is that they look at you like a transaction, right? And if they don't think that this is a smart investment or a transaction, they don't really help you. They just like, okay, here's the application, just fill it out. I mean, okay, I know that, but you're not going to give me any additional information, any tips, nothing. And that has been the experience. But I also would like to see more information about that. The engagement people. How does what has your interaction been with millennials? Yeah, I know that women may not get funded as much, but what does that look like? How has an experience been? Mine has been, they looked at me like I was a transaction. So,
Thank you. We're going to continue this project next year. So I am writing down all of your ideas, which will be phenomenal starting points for our next cohort of students. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll just. Okay, that one, okay, so my name is Victoria Ritchie. For me, definitely college educated, overly college educated. I was actually covered, and then it's because of my injury, my health condition. I had to switch to John Hopkins actually doing my School of Public Health. They had to take me because they were like, hey, we need your insight. You're very smart and we can provide it then very much. So I can work, I can do stuff at home. And still finish my graduate degree. But one thing we're not talking about is the intersectional of disability. Let me tell you, I used to live the best life in LA, Long Beach, La Jolla, you can name it. I had the best job. I stitched up in Kaiser, right? National team. But one thing that you never know, as a person of color, we also have, not only do we deal with a lot of racism or anything, we also have socio-economic some determinants of health that really puts us in a disadvantage. So I had to go back and live in Land Empire Riverside. That's a more because that's where my parents live, and usually that's where they don't have enough access of healthcare. Like if I want to go to see my neurosurgeon, I have to go to LA, Sunset, and it's because they don't get ready. It's not because it's not because they know because I'm just another patient in LA. No, it's because I used to work there and I know people, right? And in Riverside, we don't have that access. We don't have access for physical therapy. Like it's back now. But point where you can tell, I have to literally use a walker in my 30s. I just turned 38 yesterday, and this is my celebration, right? Thank you. For me, overall, I did, sociology, science, and medicine in UC San Diego, 10 years ago, and I talked about this intersectionality, all these issues about, how we're disadvantaged. So I will challenge students now to think about joining ideas in different disciplines, like health, not just look at one sector only, look at finance, government, non-government, health, disability, like other things that really affect the entire overall system for people. And that's actually that's DOH to the demons. Yeah, just want to say that.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I have a question. What exactly is diversity programs? And the reason why I'm asking is because a lot of department stores have them. And for instance, Nordstrom's, Macy's, all the department stores have a minority or diversity program, and there is a special department for it. Well, I've been trying to get into that program for years with Nordstrom's, and they just have it as a showcase because the buyer does not connect with the minority with this program. So the buyer is the one that makes the decision to buy the goods, and this one is just a showcase. Do companies get a tax break, or what is the reason for them to have a department of diversity programs? They do?
So private companies have supplier diversity programs, which is one of the recommendations that y'all had. How do we increase more avenues? President Biden, one of his first acts as a leader, also gave an executive order directing our federal government to increase our supplier diversity spend. The challenge with private companies is it doesn't need to be, there's no tax write-off that comes with you gaining supplier diversity. you could say you are building a
Because they
supplier.
advertise on the radio.
Right,
or
you
on
can say that
TV,
you are
the radio.
correct, and it's probably good
But
brand.
when it comes to really work with them,
Yeah.
they're not.
It's probably good around building brand visibility, and actually we saw a lot of companies put out statements in 2020 after the summer that we had and the unfortunate, tragic murder of George Floyd and all of the summer activities that took place. We saw a lot of companies put out statements, a lot of them, right? We're gonna do this, we're gonna do that for this community.
Yeah.
I think the challenge is around the accountability aspect. So on our end, yes, there's a brand benefit, but then there could also be a potential solution. So maybe the SBA can provide some kind of incentive for them to increase their supplier diversity programs and actually make that public information as to how they've diversified their program in the last, year. Maybe there is an opportunity to think about how our government can support that avenue. I'm not aware of any, trying to go through all the states where we have offices, see if anyone has done this. Our own state is a supplier, has a supplier diversity program too. But a lot of those contracts happen through relationships. It's it's building a
Exactly.
relationship. So once you're getting your
Not
foot in the
really
door,
through programs.
and so trying to do some I would say do some LinkedIn stalking, good old LinkedIn stalking.
I
of
do.
Who's the supplier person at Nordstrom, or maybe,
Yeah.
let's just
I
be.
was just, I can also.
Yeah.
So yeah, to the point that, there's no, tax benefits, in terms of, launching a supplier diversity program for a corporation. And I think most corporations, and I think sort of why we're all here today, is that there's an understanding that investing in diverse communities is an impact to the bottom line. It's beneficial. There's a business value coming out of it. I would say that each supplier diversity program does still rely on small businesses being certified in a particular for their particular identity. So if you're not a woman-owned business certified LGBTQ African American, I would encourage you all to look into that. The best resource for that would be your local chamber of commerce. I'm sure there's tons here in your community. Just ask them simply, how do I get certified as a woman-owned business, or whatever identity that you identify with. So that's sort of step one. For Wells Fargo, we do have supplier diversity managers that are assigned to each vertical. If you want an introduction, that's invitation for everybody here. If you want an introduction to one of our supplier diversity managers, reach out to me. I have business cards. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me through Christine. I'm happy to make connections. Part of my job at Wells Fargo also is that I try my best to help navigate a very large organization for small businesses. And so the big thing is relationships. And so get to know, whether it's at Nordstrom's or Wells Fargo or any other corporate supplier, everyone has a supplier diversity manager. Most large corporations do. The first step is finding them either at a conference or on LinkedIn, or asking someone like me to make those connections.
Target has a great.
Target has a great supplier
Target.
diversity program.
Because my product is high-end, I need Nordstrom's, I need.
You gotta start somewhere, but it's a cohesive, it's what you're looking for. It may not be the store, but the model, and go to their website and they have extensive information.
Just on the topic of Nordstrom's, I actually do have a contact in my network. So yes, let's connect. I'm having an introduction. Actually, she's the president of the Seattle LGBTQ chamber, but she also works in supplier diversity for Nordstrom. So she's a good place to start.
So we are running out of time with regard to the formal presentation. There will be lots of time to talk more about this afterwards at our reception. I think we can take one more question or comment. So or Chris, you get to decide. Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. This has been a great discussion, and I agree everything. 2 points. One, I feel like, as an entrepreneur of a startup, I feel like many of our challenges are very similar to small business owners, but also a little bit different. And particularly, for example, that women-owned certification doesn't really apply to us because usually startups have at least, 2 or 3 founders, then we can, not be quantified as woman-owned, for example, that's one thing. The second thing, though, I also wanted to kind of raise attention, maybe for the next research, who's not here. Because, I mean, yes, it makes a great example to see someone like me thrive, and I see many people here like thriving, it's great. But if I see, 20 other examples that didn't survive, that's more important. So I think maybe that in the further research, we should also look into who is not making it up.
Well said.
Yeah.
Thank you. Excellent. Right here. Oh, right here. Thank you.
Hello. This was great. This was a great study and the space was great. Thank you.
Yes.
My name is Darlene Jones. Ms. Penna, I looked into my tablet here. The last time you emailed me was during the pandemic. Thank you. You gave great webinars to help small businesses like mine try to survive. Okay, so I'm the CEO of Abundant Wide Enterprises. And a lot of people are like, what do you do? I put my granny glasses on and show you what I do. You're in the dump trucks. We do a lot. So we started load in December. We acquired this dump truck in 2019. And in 2019, we worked during that last quarter. We got the truck in September. And we all know what happened in 2020. Well, to speed up this conversation, the finance company in 2022 asked us to give the truck back because we're a company, we're a corporation here in the state of California that not only did not get the PPP loan, we didn't get the EIDL either. And on top of all of that, I have a stack that's this thick of all of the bids that I submitted to the major contractors in the state, and we did not receive one of those. So the work that we did do was through a broker. Now that I don't have a dump truck, all of the prime contractors want to talk to me now. Why is that? Why won't they just give us the contract so we can get more trucks, do more work?
Amen.
Okay, so that financing part,
The access capital, the reason why we're here.
I'm gonna hold Gavin Newsom highly in regards to this. Because I want UC Berkeley and you undergraduates that are not graduating yet, we still need another project to do. Put it for next year. I want the state small business credit initiative explained to every small business owner in this state. Why don't we have access to that capital? Because according to Google, the SSBCI was originally established in 2010 and was highly successful in increasing access to capital to traditionally underserved. No one in here has even mentioned that program. Why is it's like a secret? That's my mic drop. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I'm sorry, we have to formally close this, but I really do hope people will stay and continue these important conversations that we've started here. Anytime you do a project of this scale, there are a lot of people that need to be thanked. So I just want to quickly acknowledge and thank a few people in this room. First, I want to thank our discussants, Marisol and Xiomara for coming, for sharing your stories, and for all of the women who spoke today, the brunch was incredible with you, sharing your stories. We've learned so much from you, and we hope to continue to learn from you and stay in touch. Thank you, Christopher from Wells Fargo. I also, we've been beneficiaries of Wells Fargo Foundation, and for the last 3 years, we have another year of funding. We're going to continue to do this research. And thanks to the people in this room, we now have additional research topics that we will be honing in on. So thank you for that. I also want to acknowledge Jenny Flores, who could not be here today. She's the head of small business philanthropy at Wells Fargo. She's also a Cal alum, and she's been just a wonderful partner, dedicated resource for us, and just a champion of this work. And so I really need to acknowledge her. I want to thank our research partners, small business majority. One person who's not here, Bianca Blomquist, played a really critical role in helping us recruit some of our respondents. So did people over at NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center, Selena Aponte and Pinar Chelik. So I want to thank them. They couldn't be here today. I want to offer a huge thank you to the woman in the back of the room, Luca Marks. None of this would have been possible. Luca has been an incredible partner and thought partner, an organizational partner. She has really held this project together. She is our project manager. She managed the screening process, recruitment, data management, all of the important components that make for good research, in addition to being just a constant source of wonderful, constructive feedback, and just absolutely 100 and 1,000% committed to this work. In addition to organizing this day and all of the complexity that it involves, and the reception that we want everybody to join us at. So Luca, heartfelt thanks to you for your role. I also want to thank our wonderful Ezra Bristow, our event and communications coordinator. He's behind the scenes here, but boy, absolutely fundamental in making we're a seamless program. Thank you so much. I also want to thank our two undergraduate student assistants, Melody Coronado and Ashley Fung, for helping with setup. They're probably out there now with our reception. Finally, I want to say a heartfelt thanks to our Diversity and Entrepreneurship Fellows. Okay. You took on this challenge of doing original research on a topic that most of you knew absolutely nothing about. But it is of critical importance, as we have heard today, to our communities, to our state, to our nation. This was a lot of work, much more than I think you ever imagined when you signed up to be a fellow. And yet, you showed up every single day. You gave your all. You put your heart into this work. And I think we saw, the fruition of that today. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for pushing yourselves, for to grow, to learn, and also for the kindness and compassion and generosity with which you treated each other. Team-based research projects are not necessarily that easy, but this is an incredible group of students who listened to each other, learned from each other, shared, and grew together. And it was an absolute joy. My favorite thing I did all summer and all spring was working with you guys. Such generosity. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for lifting up the through your research and today's presentation and the research brief, the stories, experiences, inequities, challenges, resiliency, and voices of the women of color, small business owners that you shared their stories today, in addition to sharing your insightful analysis and recommendations and being open to feedback, which we absolutely are. And that's a really important part of learning. I hope you will always remember this research project, and I hope that you will take the lessons that you learned and the stories that you heard and the memory of the people that you had the privilege of speaking with and sharing their stories with you wherever you go next in your life's journey, and always continue to find ways to have an impact in terms of working for more just and equitable responses to the deep structural inequalities, structural racism, all of that through the rest of your lives. So with that, I will invite everybody to join us for the reception. And if you're joining us online, I'm sorry you're gonna miss that, but I hope you'll come to IGS and visit us sometime soon. Thanks, everybody.